So every now and then, Mother Nature decides to make sure you have nothing else you can do outside. It forces you to take care of some things that you needed to take care of for a while. So today, we're gonna go inside where it's nice and warm, much different than out here. We're gonna try to tackle my wife's transmission. We swapped it out a while ago, has a leaking front seal on it. So today, we're gonna try to pull it, try to get it rebuilt. I've never rebuilt a transmission, but I have a buddy who's built some with some success, so better than none, right? So let's get started. So what we have here is a 2000 Ford Mustang. It's a 3.8 liter automatic. Say what you want to about a V6 Mustang, but the car has been a great car for most of its life. As with time though, everything will show its age. Like I said, we put a transmission in here, the front seal leaked, and for my wife, it's not exactly the best daily driver vehicle when you got to put a quart transmission fluid in it every time. So what we're going to do today, we're going to rack it up, pull the transmission, we're going to go through the steps of pulling the transmission, then hopefully we're going to go through the steps of rebuilding the transmission. Like a lot of you out there, I'm sure you've had an automatic transmission go out and have to pay somebody a lot of money to do it. That's all I've ever done, but I figure worst case scenario, I end up having to get another transmission. But first, we're going to try to build it, see what happens. As the beginning of most projects, we'll start with disconnecting the battery. We will have to be disconnecting the starter, so you don't want any power down there. Next, we'll set the lift on the points and then raise it up. Anytime you're under a car, it's always a good idea to look over things. Like maybe sway bar end links could use some attention. Shocks obviously have some age. We already know the transmission fluid leak. Maybe some rear main, but have to get a lot of this fluid gone before we know for sure. Walk back through. Obviously got some signs of pinion seal issues, but it's always a good idea if you have the opportunity to get under your car, just go through everything, take a look, see if you see anything that's badly damaged. Brakes may need some attention. So just always a good idea. Don't just focus on the problem you have. Try to find and prevent other problems from happening. So now step one, just the way that I do it. I'm gonna pull that starter first so I can go ahead and get it out of the way. My preferred point is I come back here to the front. It's the rack there, maybe kind of hard to see, but and then I access my starter bolts coming from the front, and I just use some long extensions. Remove your ground wire. Well, I can't find my 13 deep well right now, so, but luckily it's already loose. So finish pulling this out. Now, so that right there, that's where your ground wire stayed strapped in. Just kind of tuck it, keep it out of the way for right now. You don't want to tear it up, but it's nothing you'll need till you're ready to put it back together. And then we've got one more bolt remaining on the top. And there's the bolt on the top. Maybe a little hard to see. I'll see if I can't get zoomed in on it for you. You can see it's right there. And I like to come to this little hole in the frame and get to it and pull it out. Now with that last bolt removed, we're able to take the starter, flip it, access the back of it to disconnect the bolts. What you have here is you have your power wire. That's one of the reasons we wanted to disconnect from the battery, so that way that's not energized. And then you have your wire activating your solenoid right here. So we want to pull both those wires out. Sorry, I know the shadows are terrible, but we want to pull both those wires apart, and then we can remove the starter. So I found these to be a 13 power wire. And then 10 for the solenoid. And now, basically, you just flip this around, and sometimes you hold your mouth right and it comes out. Other times, you sit there and ponder your life decisions until it just happens to come. So if we were just replacing the starter, we would be halfway. We just reverse the steps and put it back in. But unfortunately, we've got a lot more to take off. Now at this point, we're going to disconnect our shifter linkage. Doing that because now we want to be able to switch between in park. We want to be able to go to neutral. We want it in neutral so that way we can roll our drive shaft, be able to access the bolts, but then put it in park when we're trying to break them loose. Now that the 4 bolts holding the drive shaft to the rear end are removed, it's time to pull the drive shaft. Now, depending on how your car is sitting, you will probably lose some fluid when this drive shaft is pulled. I tend to like to have a little baggie with a rubber band on it. I'm going to push the drive shaft forward. Get my bag ready. The bag secured over the end of the tail shaft. I'm going to wrap a rubber band around it. All this is going to do is help you from making a complete mess when it's time to drop the transmission. Now we're going to focus on disconnecting all of our electronics so we can get cross members and everything out of the way. These are your O2 sensor leads. Just going to squeeze and pull. At least that's what they say. Sometimes they need some help. We've got those disconnected. Let's move to the side. If you look in here, we've got that connector that goes to the selector switch. We've got that bracket there that holds on to, I don't know what the technical term is. It's the part attached to your gear shift. It just moves your selector switch. We need to get those loose. Alright, now with that bracket out of the way, we have a little bit more room to access and get this big switch out somehow. I'm recording a YouTube video. So it depresses in and pulls out. So at that point now, this harness right here, which is also part of back here with the O2 sensors. I'm sure it's hard to tell. That is all one harness. And we need that out of the way. So that way we make sure we don't damage anything while we're pulling the transmission. You sure?
Yes.
So apparently winter storms sometimes cause blackouts or your lights to flicker.
Yeah.
So looking right up from the selector switch, there's this little piece here. If I pretended to know what it was, it'd just be a lie. I don't like doing that. So we need to make sure we get that unclipped and out of the way. Hopefully by the end of this, we'll all know what it is. If not, I haven't learned anything. Now onto the passenger side of the vehicle. Got, see if I can get you in there. We got this little sensor right here. Well, not so much as a sensor or controller. I don't really know what it is. But either way, we need to get it out of there. So as you can see, it is now disconnected. Make sure that when you reinstall it, that ring gets put back in. But all I did was depressed at the top of it and pushed it out of there. So as you can see now, we clearly have our transmission harness out of the way. It's set over here to the side, so that way as we're dropping it, nothing can hang on it. We've got our selector cable. It's tucked back out of the way. Our O2 sensors are clear. So at this point, it's time to create a support for the transmission. We'll undo the rear cross member and start undoing torque converter bolts. So this task on a lift would not be possible. Well, I'm sure it would be possible by other means, but I prefer to do things safely and not get myself hurt or tear things up. So, went to Northern Tool, bought this Strongway 1,000-pound transmission jack. Now, I know it's not the best thing out there on the market, but as most of us are on a budget, so transmission jack from one of the bigger name brands was just out of the reach. But we're gonna try this one, see if it works for us. So when I'm setting these up, I'm basically going to the outsides of the pan. As you can see, we've got a large recess down into the pan, or poke out, whatever you want to call it. I'll set these to the outer extremities of the pan so that way it's going to help hold and support it. Got our safety chain here. We're going to take up all the way over the transmission, bring it down here, and hook onto it. Now, we're not going to create all sorts of pressure like we're trying to pull it with it, but we do want to use that chain to stabilize it. So with the power outage yesterday, I had to pretty much shut everything down. It was already dark enough, video's gonna be terrible. Trying to come up with a better way to light underneath the car while it's on the lift. Haven't come up with that answer yet. So let's go ahead and pick up today. We've got this little inspection cover here. We're gonna reach up, simply just remove it. inside of there, we've got our nuts for our torque converter. We're going to attach onto the crank pulley bolt there to rotate the motor over. Access each one of those and take those loose. As you can see, we've got torque converter nut off. Now we're going to rotate it over till we can see the next one. And then we'll continue to repeat this process until all the torque converter nuts are off. Well, things were going good until they weren't. So now it would appear I've stripped one of the nuts out. I guess I put it on way too tight when I installed this transmission previously. So guys, pay attention when you're putting stuff back together, because at some point you're probably going to have to take it off again. There's a few ways to go about removing a stripped nut. I'm going to have to figure out which way gets this one off. As you can tell, it's pretty rounded. So we'll try a few different things, see where we get. Alright, so as you can see, we got it out. The method I used was I took a smaller socket and basically just beat the life out of it over the other one. What you'll see is it'll take and actually carve into it. The extra metal shavings will help grip onto it. Now, it does put wear and tear on your socket. And of course it destroys the nut, but since this one was already stripped, we knew we had to get a new one anyways. So, that's just one method I use in order to get them loose, but just beat a smaller socket over it. Now when you do that, use a 12 point, so that way it gives you as many points of grip as possible. And most of the time it works. See, with the socket off, you can tell I pretty much just chewed the grooves into it. So, just figured I'd share that. So at this point, now that we've got the torque converter bolts loose, we're going to work on removing this rear cross member. Next is going to be the bell housing bolts, which is the bolts that attach the transmission to the engine, and then try to slide her out of the way. With the cross member out of the way, we're going to focus on the bell housing bolts. Like I said earlier, it's the bolts that connect the engine block to the transmission. I can't remember exactly how many there are, and there are some that come from the engine side. And as you can tell by looking up there, there's some that come from the transmission side. And just make sure you get all of those before you try to drop the transmission. And there we go, the transmission's out. I did end up removing the exhaust, basically because my hands are too fat to fit in anywhere else. So I got them out the way so that way I could have more access. But really it was 2 bolts on the manifold there, 2 bolts on the manifold there, and then 2 bolts back here. Now, we've got a dirty mess, and we're fixing to make more of a mess. So I'm ending this video off here. There's not anything really missed between undoing the bell housing bolts and putting it on the table. Chose not to record that because depending on what your situation is, you're probably going to have to do it different. From pulling your transmission in a driveway, you may be able to lay on your back, be able to reach all the bell housing bolts from one spot. Maybe you get a couple from the top with a wrench. If you've got a lift like I do, the easiest way is to try to stand all the way back. If you lower the transmission jack, then you can get the motor mounts to twist a little bit. You can stand at the tail shaft, use long extensions, and get all the bell housing bolts from there. It's real hard with the lighting that I have available to try to show everything and get the camera where you can even see it. So that's why I chose not to record there. In the next session, we're going to be taking the transmission apart. I'll go over all the parts that we can. I've got a buddy's coming in. He's going to be able to name the parts. I don't know what most of these things do. Like I said, I've never built a transmission before. So in the next part, we'll work on the teardown, and then I have ordered a rebuild kit, and we'll go through that, and hopefully we'll have a working transmission by the end of this. So thank you. Y'all have a good one. I'll holler at you later.